Okay, everyone, we'll get started. It's a couple minutes after. We wanted time for everybody to jump on. I'm Jerry K. LaRue. I'm a managing broker at Best Choice Realty, and I do most of the compliance for the firm, so I'm reviewing all the documents. And today we're going to talk about earnest money and FAQs and how to handle earnest money. So next slide, Shannon. So I guess the number one thing that we need to talk about is what is earnest money. So lots of, back in the day, earnest money was considered consideration for a contract, but that's not what it is. You actually don't need to put earnest money down in order for there to be consideration in the agreement. But it is actually a deposit that is given from the buyer to the seller, and it signifies how serious they are. So the amount of earnest money is important between the two parties. And we also are going to talk about who holds the earnest money. So for our firm, we do not have a trust account. And for that reason, we do not hold earnest money. If we're on the selling firm, we do not hold earnest money. We instruct all of the agents on all the contracts that all earnest money is to be deposited with the closing agent. You will find, however, that there are a couple of firms. I know John L. Scott, Windermere. There are some others that they do have trust accounts and they do hold earnest money. But for Best Choice Realty agents, it's always going to be closing agent. Next slide, Shannon. So on the front page of the contract, there are remedies for default. So if one of the parties defaults on a contract, depending on what is checked on term 8, the default section is determined who gets the earnest money. And for our firm, we always choose forfeiture of earnest money. There are times on large purchases, the $1 million, $2 million and higher ranges, that we will see about 1% where the seller's election of remedies is checked. But most of the time, 99% of the time, it's going to be forfeiture of earnest money. And this is a better option when you're representing a buyer. And it also gives a finite amount of what is the remedy for the default. So for example, if it's $5,000 earnest money, that we know that only $5,000 is going to be given up to the other party. So that is better for your client. If you see down below for selection, seller's election of remedies, this is such an infinite amount. It could range into thousands and thousands of dollars. Seller may at seller's option keep the earnest money as liquidated damages as the sole and exclusive remedy available to seller for such failure. B, bring suit against buyer for seller's actual damages. C, bring suit to specifically enforce this agreement and recover any incidental damages. Or D, pursue any other rights or remedies available at law or equity. This is huge, and it could encompass so many different things that for the most part, we choose forfeiture of earnest money so that we kind of have a finite idea of what that amount could be.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. We can move on. What we'd like to do, I believe it's the poll next. Is that right, Shannon?
Yes.
So what I'd like to do at this time, you'd actually be really surprised with the number of contracts that we see, and even with seasoned agents, people who have been doing this for years and years and years, that they don't actually know the right answer for when earnest money is due. So what we'd like to do is take a poll right now, and you guys just click one of the answers and we'll review that. So how many days does the buyer have to turn in earnest money? Is it 2 business days, 2 days, 3 business days, 3 days, or 5 days? If you guys would just take a moment to submit your answers for us. When can we tell when they're done?
I'll let you know, Jerry K. We're getting lots of
Awesome.
responses.
That's great.
I have a question. Can you tell which one of us get it wrong?
No, it's completely anonymous.
I won't tell on you.
I'm just joking.
No, completely anonymous. All I see is a number a tick. So
we
it's
have
slowed
about-
down quite a bit, Jerry K. So we've got, let me see if maybe I can even show you. But
Got about
it's
22 people on here, so.
Yep. So from the people who submitted an answer, 64% said 2 business days. Ooh, 67 now. 13% said 2 business days. 13% said 3 business days. 6% said 3 days.
And no one said 5 business days.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
No one said 5. So you guys are.
Okay.
Yep.
So as you can see, we have various ideas of when it's due, and most of us have been doing real estate for many years or been through the classes and have passed our test. So we should, there's the poll. So 69% is 2 business days. That's great. But we do have some answers in 2 days, 3 business days, and 3 days. So if we go to, well, the next, I think, did we do the calendar?
That's
Maybe we're
next.
gonna-
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to scroll over to what the answer is. So let's scroll down one more page.
One more, Shannon.
One more, Shannon, and then I'll come back and we'll do a little run on. So the answer is two days, which anything under 5 days is, it is considered business days. So it's within 2 days after mutual acceptance. The difference here is the answer could have been, it could have been 5 days depending on who the buyer delivered the earnest money to. So the buyer has an obligation to deliver the earnest money within 2 days to either the selling broker or the closing agent. The reason why I say that it could be up to 5 days could have been the right answer depending on who received the funds is that if the buyer delivered it to the selling broker on the due date, which would have had to been within 2 days, that they then have an additional 3 days to turn it in to escrow, as long as they have a receipt to do so, which is a Form 89. And we will go and show you that receipt page later. So it's 2 business days. So if you got it on a Friday, 2 days would be Sunday, and we know that escrow's closed and you can't deposit it on a Sunday. So it is 2 business days. So if it was on a Friday, you would have till Tuesday of the next week. So we'll go back to, we had a calendar up. We'll do a little example here. The reason why we're pulling up September here is because we are coming up on a holiday. And a holiday does affect when things are due and time and computation of time for the other timelines that are in the contract. So in this example, if we got mutual agreement signed around on the 1st, and we all determined that it's 2 days, providing we're in the middle of the week. So earnest money would be due from the buyer to either the selling agent or escrow by Thursday. So mutual agreement is day 0. Your internet isn't stable, so I hope you guys can hear me. Mutual agreement is day 0, so day 1 is Wednesday, day 2 is Thursday. Now, if the buyer delivered the earnest money to the selling agent and we prepare Form 89 that we have a transfer receipt to escrow, then the selling agent has an additional up to an additional 3 days. Well, anything 5 days and under does not include weekends or holidays. So if it's Thursday, the agent got it, we have 3 more days. So we got Friday's day 1, Saturday and Sunday don't count. But this one's a little unique because the 7th is a Labor Day. So the holiday doesn't count either in this case. So day 3, so we're at day 1 is Friday, day 2 would be Tuesday, and day 3 would be Wednesday. So does that make sense? Anybody have any questions or concerns with that computation of time? So this is one of the things that I am very diligent about when we come to holidays and I'm reviewing your files to help you, because it is very important of when the earnest money is received from the buyer. One of the other pushbacks that I get when I do send out my little help dates to agents is I'm looking at it not just if we are we're the buyer's agent. I also am very concerned if we are the listing agent, and you should be concerned too. So listing agents do have a duty to make sure that the earnest money was due on time. And I've gotten it several times when I'm having discussions with agents in the firm that that's not my responsibility. That's the selling agent's responsibility. That's the buyer's responsibility to get their earnest money in on time. Yes, it is. You're right. You're absolutely right. But it is the listing agents. You have a duty to your seller to make sure it was due on time. Oftentimes the seller doesn't know when it was turned in. They don't get to see the receipt. The firm sees the receipts and the agent see the receipts, but the seller didn't see the receipt. And what's really important about this point is that this is one of the only options. If the earnest money was turned in late, it's one of the only options that seller has to back out of the deal because the earnest money was not timely delivered. But if they didn't know about it, then they wouldn't have that option. There might have been multiple offers and maybe one came in late after the offer review date. That was a way much better offer. This could be an opportunity where the seller could say, I'm rescinding the deal because the buyer didn't turn in their earnest money timely, and they're going to go and get that better offer. But most of the time, the contract's written on the buyer's behalf. All the contingencies, all the outs, they're all weighted heavily towards the buyer, and the seller really doesn't have much recourse. So it is the listing agent's responsibility to work on your seller's behalf to be, don't wait until you get the list of checklist items from me or Rochelle when we're doing it that says, hey, we haven't gotten the earnest money yet, or hey, it was late. You should be looking right after day 2, and you should start asking, where's the earnest money? Where's the earnest money? Haven't gotten the receipt, because you want to look at the date and make sure it came on time, because at that point you could have some options. So it is very important for both sides to know and make sure that the earnest money was done on time.
So quick question before we keep going, Jerry Kay, is what type of conversation should we be having with our sellers in regards to earnest money? And how should we be communicating how earnest money, whether or not it's timely delivered or not?
I mean, for my business practice, it's not something that I normally have a conversation with the seller about unless it becomes an issue. Because for the most part, I'm going to try and mitigate and keep all of the worry and stress away from my client. I'm going to take the burden on that. But if it does come in late, then I'm going to have that conversation. And you may have that, you may choose to do your business differently. That is up to you. We are all 1099 and we each have our own way of doing things. But I'm trying to make it as easy and seamless as possible. So I'm not gonna even worry my client about it unless it's an issue. And then if it's an issue, then absolutely, we're gonna have the conversation and we're gonna talk about what is our recourse and what options do we have at that time. Because it is the seller's responsibility to make the decision, but we've got to let them know what that is. Any other questions? Okay, we did go over this because I did switch the slides a little bit. So, it's really interesting to us, both Rochelle and I, that many of our agents and the other side of the firm, that they don't even realize where to look in the Form 21 or 25, any of the other forms, but earnest money is specifically spelled out within the contract. You don't have to, the slide before was a little excerpt that I took out of the manual, but this is the paragraph that actually comes out of the purchase and sale agreement, which is term B, which says essentially the same thing that we just talked about before, where the buyer shall deliver their earnest money within 2 days after mutual acceptance to selling broker or to the closing agent. And then it goes on to say that if it's to the selling agent that they have 3 days. And this does talk more about if the money's over $10,000 and who gets to have interest and all that kind of stuff. It's not really a point for us because we don't have a trust account and we don't hold all of that, but this is a place that you would go to research if by chance you had one of those selling firms like a John L. Scott that did hold earnest money, that you knew about this, particularly if it was over $10,000. But a lot of the times prices are increasing, so earnest money is getting larger. So this is something to know, but oftentimes it's under $10,000. But you would go to Term B on Form 21. So what are some examples of what constitutes as late? We have many different ways of having earnest money deposited, and that is changing with technology. It's not just personal checks and cashier's checks. Now we have the ability to do wires too. So if a wire is delivered or sent, if it's sent from the buyer on day 3, then of course that would be late. So wires are instances when I'm looking at an earnest money deposit receipt from escrow and I see that it's wired, and I have to look at the date and I have to determine if, and it's really quite interesting because sometimes I'll get a Form 89 from an agent because they know that it was 3 days late, 3 or 4 days, and I'll look at it and it's a wire, and I'll have to go back and say, I'm sorry, you never touched the earnest money. As a selling agent, they never gave it to you. It was wired. So you never handled it. And so it's late. And in that case, we would have to do some other things, which we'll talk about in a little while. What does Emily said something? 1 second here. Shannon, can you read Emily's comment?
I think we answered her question from earlier, but yep. Lynette was asking, can you change the days required since some buyers are out of state and only have a local bank? So they need to get home before being able to send money.
Of course, you can change whatever the parties agree to. Yes, you can change as part of your negotiation. You can choose to use, we didn't even talk about that in our slides today, but there are earnest money promissory notes. So if you use an earnest money promissory note, there's a couple options on there. You can check that it's due within 3 days. And I think that that's where some of our agents are getting that 3-day number from, that earnest money is due in 3 days, is because they're remembering that the earnest money promissory note said 3 days, but that's not what the actual timeline is in the contract. It is 2 days. So if you want it to be 3 days, then use the promissory note. But make sure that that's indicated on the first page of your purchase and sale agreement. That's one of the options. There also is another, you can actually type in a date. It could be 5 days. It's whatever you put in there that you guys agree to. Yes, you can change it, but you can't change it after the contract signed around a mutual. It would have to be at the time of consummation. So number 2, the buyer turns in earnest money to escrow on day 3 or later. So that would be late because they had to either turn it into the selling agent or to escrow within 2 days. So this is one where we're looking, I often see receipts, escrow will show you a couple examples, but they'll actually put a copy of the check below, and then I see the date above, and I can see that the check date was late as well as the escrow deposit date. So in that case, I know that it was never delivered to the selling agent because they didn't even write the check out until day 3. So we know that it's late in that case. We also find that escrows, they're trying to be nice by sending out these FedEx receipts and UPS labels, especially for clients who are kind of out of the area, but that does pose a hardship for us when we're trying to follow the contract of it being delivered on time. So if your client gets that receipt, we recommend that you advise them to take a picture of the receipt. So we really are going to be asking, because we have to prove that it left our hands on time. And oftentimes that's in the buyers, they're the only ones who got a copy of that receipt. So I would advise you as a selling agent to have them take a picture. Because if we have to prove that we had a receipt, there has to be a date on it, because when the DOL comes in, they're looking for transfer receipts, some sort of receipt. And a FedEx label will suffice, but we have to have a copy of it. So you'd have to ask your client for that. So make sure that they get it and they get it mailed out on time. Number 4, the selling agent turns it into escrow on 3 days. Well, the selling agent could turn it in on 3 days and it wouldn't be considered late, but they would have to have a receipt. So if we have a Form 89, there's a general run in Matrix that you can pull up on forms, but within Transaction Desk, we have a Best Choice Realty Form 89 receipt that we'd prefer that you use. But if you don't have access to your Transaction Desk, you could just pull it up under the forms. It's Form 89. So if they turned it in and they couldn't reproduce a receipt and it was day 3 or later, it could be considered late. And at that point, we have to do some other things by having a Form 34 to extend out the earnest money that's agreed upon by both parties. Any questions in this regard? We can move on. So for the firm, when we're reviewing earnest money, and many of you have seen these. So, but if you haven't, we've got about 3 different emails that we do send out to alert you. So we've gotten your receipt in the file. We're reviewing the dates. We're reviewing mutual. In this case, this is one email where the earnest money check deposit was received, but we don't really know who handled the funds. So we need another receipt. We're going to ask for, did the selling agent receive it? If they did, please turn in a Form 89. We're also asking you to verify mutual acceptance, because sometimes, when I'm reviewing, all I can do is see the document. There may be cases and the date, okay? And there may be cases where you know that you got mutual after 9 p.m., but it's still dated on the 10th. You got it 10 o'clock at 9:10 p.m. Well, mutual then really is on the 11th. But when we're reviewing the document and the date says the 10th, I don't know that mutual actually is the 11th, because all I have are the documents to look at. So I would need your help to let us know when mutual actually occurred, so that we could update the file and notate when mutual acceptance is and make the changes. And then we would say, oh, well, then earnest money isn't late anymore. But that's where I need your help. So this is one example. Shannon, the next one. So we were talking temporary earnest money receipts. I wanted to talk about this, a temporary earnest money receipt from escrow. So we'll show you Form 89 a little bit later, which is where the selling agent is receiving the funds. But there are temporary receipts, and I ask for them all the time. And people's like, well, I already turned you in the earnest money receipt. And I say, I understand that, but I believe there's a temporary receipt out there. And this is when the buyer, and this is what's so important to both sides, whether you're on the listing side or the selling side, that you get that purchase and sale agreement, the signed mutual contract, turned over to escrow right away. Because what's happening, and the reason why we're getting these temporary receipts, is because the client is walking in to First American and they're saying, hey, I'm here to deposit my earnest money. And First American says, well, we don't even have that file set up. I haven't even gotten your purchase and sale agreement yet. So they don't have a trust account set up. And so they can't give the proper receipt. So what they do is they give this temporary receipt. And it's usually dated a day before the trust account. And if all the firm got was the trust account receipt, it possibly could show, it would look like that we were late, but we're not. We have this temporary earnest money receipt that was dated by date 2. The only thing here is that the only person who got a copy of this was the buyer. So you're going to have to go to your buyer and ask them for this temporary earnest money receipt that was handed to them. I really wish that the escrow offices would keep a copy of these things, but they don't. They give the one and only copy to the buyer. So sometimes the buyer gets in their car and throws it in the back seat, and their kids, and they throw it away or something, and that's the only receipt. Escrow, I just boggles me that they don't keep a copy of this receipt, but we do need this receipt in order to prove that it was delivered on time. And the thing that will help to not get these temporary receipts is if we are doing our job as selling and listing agents and getting the mutual contract over to escrow so they can open escrow right away. The other thing that's happening that we're seeing with technology is a great thing, but it does cause us to do things differently, the way that we're handling the firm's handling of documentation in our files. So now they have all these neat things where you can electronically deposit earnest money by taking a picture, but we're getting different receipts, and we need you guys, when you get a copy of these things, or your client gets a copy of this, that they deliver this to you, because we need this to go into the file. This one, for example, is a First American, and it shows a snapshot, and down below, right above the total amount of $5,000, you can see that it was delivered on August 4th at 6:44 in the morning. This comes over in an email, and that email, if you send it into support, it's great. But what happens is that our little paperless pipeline, it doesn't recognize the source. Paperless pipeline can only read PDFs documents. They don't read links that come out of Authentisign. It doesn't have the ability to download the link in Authentisign and read it. It doesn't have the ability to read this page. So we try really hard through the support to make notations in the file that we do have a receipt with this date on it. But the thing here is that you guys know that we will need to have this receipt in the file, and we'll just make the notation. So be looking for those. BCR Form 89, like we discussed earlier, there is a matrix form called Form 89. This is a BCR Form 89, and essentially it says the same thing. It's got the Best Choice logo on the top. And this is where, when you receive it from your client on day 2, that you're saying on whatever date, which hopefully is day 2, and that's what it needs to be, right? It's day 2. That's when the buyer delivered it to you, that the selling broker received the earnest money from the buyer in the amount of $2,000 by way of, then you put, was it a check, a cashier's check, or a money order? And then what's different on here, and this follows the suit of the instructions that are in the purchase and sale agreement, is that the buyer is instructing the selling. So they're allowing us to then deliver the earnest money to escrow. It also is saying, because there are some times when the buyer hands you a check and you haven't reached mutual yet. So in that case, you have 2 days from mutual if you got it. There's a lot of language going on here. Most of the time you're getting mutual, you're writing the offer, they hand it to you, and they go off on their merry way. And we have some older clientele that don't have the ability or a car to get themselves to escrow. And so you're handling that check. And so if it's dated on day 2 and we have mutual, then the selling agent has 3 days to do it. But if you're handling it and you haven't reached mutual yet, say it took you 2 days to come to agreement, back and forth, you guys are negotiating, then the selling agent does need to get it to the closing agent within 2 days. So it does depend on when mutual occurs. I hope I didn't muddy the waters there, but feel free to call me at any time and we can go over this one-on-one if you didn't catch what I was saying. So we're back again at the emails that come out of paperless when we're doing the reviews. This is an example of the email that we received the earnest money check deposit receipt, but it's very clear that we know that it's late. And so you're going to get this email instructing you that we need a Form 34. So we need the parties to agree that the earnest money deposit date will be on, and we need it to match whatever the earnest money deposit date actually was. It was a late day, but we want the parties to agree that earnest money is now to be deposited on August 11th, which could have been a day late. So both buyer and seller, this is I think one of the most important things is that the communication is happening between the two parties. We have to agree on it, because this is a case, and we've had where we've asked for these forms, the selling agent, oops, it got late. They go to the other side with form 34 and they say, hey, this was late. Will you sign this? And Rochelle and I have had a couple instances where the seller refuses to sign this form because that's their one and only way out. They can still back out. So they can continue to move forward in the transaction, but they still have the out because the earnest money was turned in late. We would ask in that case that once we get to the closing table, that then, at that point, sellers agreeing to proceed forward to close, and that we still continue to ask for the form 34 so that we have it in the file, so that if we are audited, we can prove that we had the communication, we talked, and we got the form in the file that we could give to the DOL. We have closed on a couple things. This is an example of a form 34 that we would ask you to do. This is earnest money shall be deposited on or before February 22nd. That's an example.
So that's kind of an example like Lynette was talking about, right? Where Lynette was saying, what if I'm dealing with an older, gentleman and he's like, I can't get to the bank or whatever. As long as the parties agree, right, on a 34, when the earnest money, this would take over or would override that form 21. Is that correct, Jerry Kay?
Yes, that's correct. So you can do it later as long as they agree, but remember that this is the one where the seller has the upper hand at that point.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful. So if you know that you're, going in on your offer, if you know that you need a couple extra days, I would use the earnest money promissory note for that case. I wouldn't try and do it later, because you are putting the buyer's earnest money at risk if you do it later.
You also put it on a form 22D as well.
That's fine.
You could, section 12, the open section, you could put down there in that section. That would be, as long as the parties agree, that would be fine. So what's our next slide? So this is one where the wire deposit was received late. So I give a grace period if the due date is the 10th and we get a receipt and it says it's the 11th and it's a wire, I'm okay with that, because I know that the client, it left their hands on day 2, the 10th, it left their hands, and it takes a day for a wire to be delivered from the bank to escrow. So I give a day's grace period, but if it's anything after that, after 3 days, I know it's late. It's a wire and it was late, and we again will have to get a form 34 signed around. And this is the same example we had before. Earnest money shall be deposited on. It's best to actually put a date, but you could say earnest money shall be deposited within 5 days. You could have done that too. But a date, if you already have the deposit receipt from escrow, it's got a date on it, you might as well just match that date up, and then we're all in agreement. So we're getting near the end of our discussion today. One of the biggest things that I think most of you don't understand is how the severity of the fines that could happen. When we have been audited here at Best Choice Realty, and without a shadow of a doubt, and Rochelle and I have been through several audits, not just here at Best Choice Realty, but with other firms. The number one thing that the DOL looks for when they come in is we pull random files, and they're always 100% of the time looking at the dates for mutual acceptance and when earnest money was delivered, and they're looking for all of those receipts. And if you don't have them and you can't come up with some communication that you prove that you told the other party that it was coming late, it's a $5,000 fine. Best Choice Realty had 5 cases in our last audit that we had a potential a 5,000 fine per occurrence per agent. And luckily, with a lot of diligence and tracking of, because at that point we weren't training as much on it, and so some of our agents weren't using the Form 89. Rochelle and I were able to work through those potential fines and get them cleared off because we could prove that we had communication with the other party. Communication, we would want it to be in writing. That's the best form of communication, is if we could get it on that Form 34. But we have gotten us out of fines if we could prove that we have texts between the parties or emails between the parties where they said, yeah, I see it. Oh yeah, that was a holiday, I know. Or in COVID times, what we've been finding is that escrow isn't even open. So you go there and they're not open. And so as long as you have the communication with the seller that, you know, we went to the office and it was closed. They're only open between these hours. And, you know, most of those cases, if you have the communication and proof, we can get out of that. But at this point, this early in the game, we probably just a CYA, we would have the party still sign a Form 34 that they agreed that it could be done on time. Rochelle, is there anything that you'd like to add to?
Yeah, I mean, when we've had auditors in our office, they have personally called our agents. So we are doing a pretty good job of trying to be proactive and actually speaking with you before audits. And so Jerry Kay and I have spent time, you know, one-on-one with you on the phone or on some webinars and Zoom meetings if you have questions about specific files. I'd rather get ahead of it than to have complaints or have unhappy people or auditors that want to call you when you're in the middle of your business. That's never a fun thing. We've had a couple agents at Best Choice that have been personally called by the auditor, and it's extremely frustrating. Like it's like getting pulled over. I don't know how that feeling is. When you get pulled over by the police officer, you're like, oh geez, you know, you kind of go into that panic a little bit. What did I do? How did I correct? Am I going to be fined? I hate to have it be at that level. So we do a lot of proactive things within our firm. And the auditor, when we had our last audit, he's been an auditor for 35 years, so he's not pulling any punches. And also there are new auditors that they've hired in the last year. They have brought on 5 or 6 more additional auditors that are looking at these files. So these are newer auditors, and the older auditors are training the newer auditors, and there's a lot more audits going on. And one of the things on the last audit they said is, Rochelle, you know, with 5 occurrences with earnest money, you know, you may need to reconsider how your brokerage contract, you know, because that's significant amount of you know, disruption. And maybe you want to charge your agents a late fee for earnest monies not being turned into the firm. And I don't want to take that approach. And Jerry Kay and I both spoke about this, and we'd rather take the approach of educating and consulting with you and helping you with these addendum or these extensions rather than charging a fine. And that's just the position that we've taken at Best Choice. Other companies, when they've been audited, they've taken those approaches. I don't know if you've come from another firm, but that is something that I hear a lot of reasons, like I want to come to Best Choice because we don't have those types of situations or those fines that get assessed to your account because of these late situations or circumstances that are kind of out of your control, but you just don't know how to handle them. So we're getting ahead of it, and I feel really good about the oversight that Jerry Kay has provided. But if you have questions, you know, again, we're sending some of these things automated through paperless. So if mutual acceptance, it says may be late, you know, just email us back. Don't be offended. Just email us back and say, hey, Jerry Kay, or hey, Rochelle, you know, mutual actually was on Monday, even though, you know, the paperwork says it was on the 18th. Well, you know, we didn't know that. So again, just be nice to us. We have a lot of files that we're reviewing. And again, we are trying to maintain that compliance within our firm so we don't have any fines, that we are 100% accurate. And we have no issues with clients or saying that, you know, I lost the deal or I lost my earnest money because of these types of situations. So I think you did a great job, Jerry Kay. I'm sure there's some questions though.
Yeah, and one more thing I would like to point out, that if we're on the selling side of this and we get fined a $5,000 fine, rest assured that the DOL is going to go to the other firm and check their files too, because they can get a $5,000 fine too. The listing side can get a $5,000 fine if they don't have the right receipts and tracking in their file as well. So it's a big deal. So I think the big thing, and I hope the takeaways for some of you that got the answers wrong on the poll, we're not telling who it is that earnest money is due in 2 days. So any questions that we have?
Leah, it looks like you had a, earlier in the call, you had a question about a legal update. You took a class recently. Do you mind sharing?
Yes, I'm currently, there's a legal update on commercial and then also a legal update. We'll do another class on that type of thing. We're still gathering information because there has been some changes on the commercial purchase and sale agreement specifically. And as far as the legal update on earnest money, it is actually still the same. They have not changed that. That has been something that has been in effect for a very long time. I think there's just been a lot of confusion. And then, like I said earlier, a lot more auditors and more frequent visits to the offices than they have ever in my entire career. The amount of audits is like at 10x, you guys, of what we're seeing in the firm level. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure I jumped in and shared with you guys is the earnest money. We're seeing a lot of earnest money non-refundable. You got to make sure on the earnest money non-refundable, like Jerry Kay said, what is earnest money? And then seeing how we're changing it into a non-refundable deposit, you got to have the right language. And if you need that language, we have that in our optional clauses. We have it that you could put on an addendum, and you need to understand what that means. Otherwise, a lot of people are writing them improperly. And that also is extremely challenging for an auditor to make sense of what you are trying to do. And you're rewriting the contract, and you could be seen as breaching your duties or causing chaos or problems or malpractice, quite frankly, with the way you're conducting business. So be careful. I know we're all trying to get the deal, and that is a great strategy. I've done it myself to get the deal, but just make sure you're using the right clause, and you're maybe verifying it with us if you haven't used it in a while, to write that into the addendum, or making sure you're using the appropriate optional clause addendum that addresses that.
Which talks about seller default, because we see so many of the languages that's written that it's just non-refundable.
Right.
Well, there needs to be language in there that says, yeah, but if the seller defaults, then I still get my earnest money back.
Right.
And you also, I think we've had some misunderstandings on writing that language where the client thinks that it says non-refundable payable to the seller immediately. And a lot of them think that they're actually going to receive this $10,000 of earnest money into their hands or their bank. And that's not the case, you guys. The third party, which is escrow, holds the funds. Yes, it's released to the seller, and it's on the seller side of the closing statement, and it belongs to the seller, but the seller doesn't get to have it immediately. So that's, we hope that we clarify some of that for you guys.
Yeah. Very good. Anything else? Shannon, if there's any other, if you have questions or comments, go ahead and chat in the box.
Or unmute yourself. And just remember, we've been recording this too, so you can always go back and review this. And then if you have any questions at any time, feel free to reach out to Rochelle or myself.
So I have a question. If we do have a buyer who is 100% on board with actually releasing the earnest money, then we just have to provide the form that says escrow can release the earnest money, correct?
Correct. Yeah, you just want to make sure you're using the correct clause. There is an approved earnest money turned in from earnest money to a non-refundable deposit that most of the law firms in our area have approved. And what I see is some people getting creative and just putting on a contract, earnest money to be non-refundable. That is not proper. That is malpractice. That is areas where you don't want to play. And you need to have the proper paragraph. It's literally a paragraph. I can almost rehearse the entire paragraph. But it's that long. It's a paragraph, and you need the entire paragraph, not just the one-liner.
Is there any way to upload that to our docs in Authentisign transaction desk?
I could probably put it on a Form 34 and have that available, but it is embedded. It's a checkbox on our optional clauses.
Okay.
And that's where our attorney wants to use it. But I think I could, at least in the comments on the YouTube, I'll go ahead and post it. That way, if you guys are listening to this, you can actually grab it from there. I think that would be the appropriate place to put it. So I'll go ahead and do that once Shannon posts it on YouTube.
Thank you.
Yep, you bet. Amazing what we can get on YouTube, huh?
Well, we just want to thank you guys all for showing up today. We know it's busy and lovely and nice out there, and you want to be out there with your families, or we've got lots of deals going on. Very, very, very busy time for us at Best Choice Realty. So we appreciate you taking the time to further your training and to be better agents and to be right by your clients. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to us. Have a great day.